Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Awareness Podcast. I'm delighted today to have as my guest, Aaron Abke. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you, Susan. Delighted to be with you again.
For those of you that don't know Aaron, I just want to tell you a little bit about him. Aaron was born and raised as a pastor's son in the Silicon Valley of California. He wanted to work in church ministry like his father, and he attended the famous Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and graduated with a bachelor's degree in music and theology. Aaron spent a year working as a full-time worship pastor at a church in San Jose, until eventually at 23, he felt called to leave his religion and pursue a deeper and more authentic spirituality. At 27 years old, Aaron had a dramatic spiritual awakening that changed the course of his life. He was working as a signed fitness model in San Francisco and competing at national level in men's bodybuilding at the time, and completely walked out of his former life to dedicate his life to seeking how to return to that state of self-realization permanently. Aaron's passion is teaching unity consciousness and spiritual awakening with the world, and he does so today through his very popular YouTube channel, on social media, masterclasses, and workshops, primarily teaching through texts such as A Course in Miracles and The Law of One. Aaron believes that unity consciousness and freedom from the ego is the next evolutionary leap for mankind, is available to anyone who truly desires it. So I'm delighted to be talking to you again, Aaron. We had fun last year when you presented your Remember I Am series of workshops for the Teachers of God Foundation. So to begin with, I really just want to talk a bit about your life for those who don't know you, because you've had quite a journey.
Haven't we all?
Yeah. And obviously you were brought up in a Christian home. Your father was a pastor, and that was how you saw your life turning out. So talk a little bit about that. Tell us about your early life and your Christian belief, and how that was such a central part of your life growing up.
Sure. Well, firstly, I want to say that my bio sounds much better when read in your accent. I have to give you that. So I grew up as a pastor's kid, like my bio described. I wanted to be a pastor my whole life. I was a really devout Christian. And I like to say, for all the right reasons. It wasn't because I was afraid of hell or I wanted to earn brownie points with God to get good things in life. I genuinely loved God ferociously and was obsessed with Jesus and wanted to be just like Jesus and couldn't stop reading the New Testament and worshiped every day. I was just so devout in my faith. And that's, I think, what ultimately led me out of my religion, because one of my first videos on YouTube is titled Why I Left Christianity for Jesus. Because it was like, I got this job at this church after Oral Roberts University, and he was preaching hellfire all the time and damnation, and the rapture is coming soon. And if you don't confess Jesus, you're in trouble. And I was like, man, I don't know who you're talking about. Like, this Jesus you're preaching, I don't see him in the Gospels. I don't see this God revealed in Christ coming out of your mouth. You talk about this vengeful, wrathful God, a Jesus who is coming back one day to go to war with everyone who's not a Christian and, demands a blood sacrifice. And I'm like, I never saw that in Jesus in the red letters. I never saw Jesus who said, confess me as your Lord and Savior. I'm going to be crucified to forgive your sins. Worship me. I am your Savior, all this stuff. I don't know who you're talking about. The Jesus I keep seeing in the Gospels was, a pacifist who said, turn the other cheek to your enemy, forgive 70 times 7. He walked around the streets of Jerusalem freely telling people, announcing that their sins were already forgiven. who, stood in front of the prostitute about to be stoned, who, went over and over and over again in his teachings to say that God is a God of loving kindness and compassion and mercy. And we're the violent ones. We're the ones who want wrath and retribution and vengeance. So God's ways being higher than our ways doesn't mean God's more violent than we are. It means God's more compassionate and merciful than we are. And all this stuff you're preaching just sounds like a bunch of man-made nonsense to me. That's just where I was at 23. So I quit my church job, moved back to Oklahoma where I'd gone to school, and just kind of pursued the next 4 years into, enlightenment teachings and non-duality, and started with Eckhart Tolle and Alan Watts, and then went deeper into Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism, and just started rediscovering my conception of the divine.
Yeah, I really resonate with that because, I too was a Christian, and the joke and I didn't come from a Christian family. I became a Christian in my teens. And the joke in our family was that, where's Susan? Oh, she's upstairs with her boyfriend Jesus. She's got her head in the Bible. Yes. I always said that, my first love was Jesus. And exactly, I resonate completely with what you said. The Jesus that I knew and loved, I couldn't see. There was such a disconnect.
Yeah.
I don't know how you felt, Aaron, when you left Christianity, but it broke my heart.
Yes.
And it was almost like saying, I can remember writing a letter in my journal. It was kind of like saying goodbye to Jesus.
A breakup letter.
It's almost like it's not you, it's them. This was like in my 20s.
It's not you, it's not even me, it's them.
But did you feel that too, though, that sense of sadness? Of how did you feel when you left all of that?
Yeah, very well said on your behalf. It was like getting divorced twice or something. When it's hard for people to understand, I think, who didn't grow up religious or very devout in their religion. People who grew up in a cult can definitely relate. Really, all religion is a more organized, more worldwide cult in a sense. And it was like leaving your entire framework of reality. You believe God is this way and that way, and that's kind of your comfort and your security and your certitude. And then all of a sudden it's all upended. And it's like, nope, that God doesn't exist. The universe doesn't work like that. And so you're kind of left in this identity crisis, this existential crisis of like, I don't know who I am, what life is, but a lot of scary possibilities I haven't considered before are now coming up to meet me. And so I went through a kind of closet atheist phase because I had so sternly and rigidly rejected that religious archetype of God, this wrathful, jealous, insecure deity, that it was like, okay, well, I know for sure that God doesn't exist and is an invention of man's mind, a projection of man's mind. But what if there isn't a God then? Like, if that's not God, what is God? And I had to test out the waters of atheism for a while, which terrified me because, again, I was always a very devout Christian and I wanted to believe in a higher power. And after a few months of this daily terror of like, maybe there's no God, there's no nothing, it's all just pointless and we go nowhere, I started reading near-death experiences because I wanted some kind of security blanket again of like, is there truth beyond this realm? And if anyone knows that there is, it's people who've died, right? Let me read their accounts. And so I did, and I found, to my total joy and delight, that near-death experiences were like my first savior out of that dark night, because every story I read was the same, essentially. Very unique accounts and very unique experiences, but the same elements were there in all of them, which was the light, the source, which was unconditional love and non-judgment, and just melted people with love. Life review of reviewing all of your life experience and learning from your mistakes and like, oh, please let me go back. I need to undo this karma I've created. So the idea of reincarnation came into my mind of, oh, this must be how it works. We are infinite souls that are like fractals of that source that are getting projected into space-time over and over and over and over and over to keep evolving and crystallizing closer to our essential nature and returning, sort of like, a bubble floating to the surface of the ocean. Like, we're returning back to the source on this journey. And so that made sense to me. And so then the natural progression from there was Buddhism and Hinduism, which teach a lot about reincarnation. And then eventually I was led to the Law of One and A Course in Miracles, which are kind of my two heaviest sources of teaching now.
I went into the kind of atheist thing, maybe not as strongly as I wouldn't maybe not have called myself an atheist, but I just rejected it all. I want nothing to do with that. I'm just, that period of my life is over. I'm not spiritual in any sense now. I'm just
the deconstruction phase.
Yeah, just like my normal phase, I used to call it. Just be normal, Susan. You don't need all of this spiritual stuff. Just be normal.
Yeah.
Which I laugh at now.
Which is actually quite spiritual in a way.
So your bio says at 27 years old, you had a dramatic spiritual awakening. So tell us about that. What happened? What changed for you?
I could say that maybe for the first time in my life to that point, that reality happened. Reality dawned. It feels as though looking at my life before that point, it was always just like a walking dream or something. I was in this realm of total truth and reality and never saw it before until that day at 27, where basically I'd gotten divorced, married at 23, divorced at 26, and then, left my faith, my religion, lost every friend I had, basically. My entire family abandoned me as a heretic other than my parents and sister. So it was like this feeling of loss and insecurity and uncertainty. So I was in this really depressing period of my life where all the walls had collapsed for me. And that's often where the light shines through, right? So I was going up to this balcony above the gym I worked at Google in Mountain View. I was a personal trainer at Google at the time. And I would go on this balcony and listen to Eckhart Tolle for about an hour on my lunch break and just watch the clouds pass by and just feel the peace of the words Eckhart was speaking. And just like by knowing the way things really are, we find liberation, And so I would find peace in the words Eckhart was teaching. And I probably did that for 2 or 3 months. And then just one day, for whatever reason, the stars aligned that day. And I was listening to a lecture where Eckhart was sort of mocking things the ego voice says to us in our heads. And then he would start laughing and the audience would laugh and I would laugh. And he did like 5 in a row. And it was things like, oh, if only people would just see how special I am, then I would truly be happy. And then he would go, ha, 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 ha. And so I just started laughing with this lecture because I recognized how true it was that like, yeah, that's exactly what my stupid voice in my head says. But it was something about the laughter. Laughter can be a really potent way of realizing something. That I sort of laughed myself into samadhi, where it was like I saw it so crystal clear that voice that had been the cause of all my torment was nothing but a tape recorder, sort of. And it wasn't what I was. It was like some old evolutionary mechanism that was just running.
Recorded by you.
Right, exactly. And I was just playing this tape every day and woohoo and hitting the play button. Yeah. And then at night I hit the stop button and I go to sleep and I have peace and I wake up and hit play and woohoo. It's like, what am I doing to myself? This is ridiculous. And so it felt like this cosmic joke was played on me that like, I'm not the voice in my head. I am pure awareness. And it was so blissful to realize that it sort of felt like it locked my ego in a broom closet for a couple of weeks. And I just spent 2 weeks in that sort of Buddha state of like full third eye activation. And so I went from laughing into crying, like happy tears. And, I'm sitting not that far from like a bunch of software engineers eating their lunch. And I'm sure that they were just thinking I was a psychopath. But I kind of floated back down the stairs to my next appointment for my job. And it was like everything that happened was sublime and perfect for 2 weeks. And I couldn't even remember how to suffer. Suffering felt like some weird, bizarre dream I once had. How could I possibly suffer in a reality this perfect? And it was the experience of no self for 2 weeks. And then I woke up at 2 weeks to the day where I looked at my phone and realized it had been 2 weeks since I had been in that state of consciousness. And the first ego thought came back online, and I didn't catch it. And it said, wow, I wonder if this is my permanent state of consciousness. I wonder if I'm enlightened now, like Eckhart. And went about my day. And then slowly it just unraveled, and the ego came back online, and all the tormenting thoughts of I'm lonely, no one loves me, I'm rejected, blah, blah, blah. And I felt that state of consciousness slipping away. And I was like, no, it was like a bar of soap. I couldn't grab it anymore. And that the guilt came down, and like, oh man, you had this free sample of enlightenment the universe bestowed upon you, and you screwed it up because you couldn't be aware of your ego, you moron. And I just felt so ashamed of myself that I had lost this perfect heavenly state of consciousness. But that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Because what that did for me was it burned away any possible ability to desire anything but that. Because like once you've tasted pure ecstasy for 2 weeks, how could you possibly want anything in the world? So it was like I had no ability to doubt that enlightenment was a real state of consciousness, totally available to the human in this life. And number two, I completely lost the ability to want anything in the world. It's like everything was like ashes and dust compared to that. And so I just naturally devoted my life to figuring out how to back engineer that state of consciousness again and, sort of reattain it, quote unquote. And I sort of made this commitment to myself that like, if I can remember how to get back to that state of consciousness, I will devote my life to teaching it to the world. And that's just sort of the way it manifested over the next few years.
So what did you do to reverse engineer? Because often we hear, as you were speaking there, we often hear when we have these glimpses, not to try and recreate that, not to hold on to that past memory, because often we do that. We think, oh, that was so exquisite. That was it. Now I need to somehow get it back. So talk about the difference between, because it feels as though I've just completely contradicted what you said. But I want you to explain how that's different. We're not trying to get back to some past state, but at the same time, talk about that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, because some of the things that were revealed to me in that experience was that this is my natural state, number one. This is what's always there underneath all the layers of BS. And so I have to, we think about transcendence as this like overcoming of something, but it's really an unbecoming of something. And it was very clear that what happened was, through that realization I eliminated all of the baggage that was obscuring this inner light from shining in my mind. And then as the ego came back online, it like piled on all of those dumb thoughts and beliefs that don't map onto reality. So I have to unbelieve in them. I have to uninvest myself from them. And really, like the way that I experienced that 2-week enlightenment period was that it felt like a higher state of intelligence. Just to put it simply, it felt like I was so much more intelligent that I couldn't suffer. And I suffered before because I was just stupid in a sense. Like I just couldn't see the way of things. So I started feeling it, experiencing it, intuiting it as like spiritual intelligence. So it was like remembering what it was like to be spiritually intelligent and recapture that. So I actually teach that now on my YouTube channel through the chakras, that each energy center is like a different level or layer of spiritual intelligence that exists within us. And to activate your chakras is really just activating a higher level of spiritual intelligence. You're more in tune with the way things really are in reality. You're not lost in your delusions and dreams, right? So I just started studying mostly Advaita Vedanta first, probably for 4 years straight, just non-duality. And that was really good for me because it cultured and prepared a way in my mind and nervous system for a higher level of energy to start manifesting. And after about 4 years of that, I started experiencing what we call like Kundalini activations, different symptoms or kriyas, as they say. And so I started studying more of that tradition of Kundalini yoga, the tantras, the sutras, and Taoist traditions that talk about energy activation. And through the law of one, especially, I sort of naturally made this connection that the law of one describes it as the fourth density of consciousness, which correlates to the fourth chakra of the heart, that humanity is currently going through this transition from a third density state of consciousness to a fourth density state. Third density state is the ego state of the solar plexus chakra, where we believe we're separate from everything. You know, Course in Miracles talks really well about this. I am a separate, independent body living in a separate world, and I have to go fight my way to survival. That's third density of consciousness. Once the photon of consciousness vibrates fast enough, this new realization becomes available of, okay, yeah, it's true that we're all in these different bodies, so to speak, but it's becoming more clear that we're all one essence. We are all one energy, one consciousness knowing itself. And because that energy or consciousness is infinite, it needs infinite bodies to experience itself through, but it's all one. And that recognition is what we call love, where I'm just like, I see myself in everyone. It's like, it's just me everywhere. And it's so blissful to see that. That's a higher level of spiritual intelligence that comes available when the heart chakra is activated and opened. So that sort of Kundalini activation started happening in me, and I started doing more breath work and Kundalini yoga, Kriya yoga practices to cultivate it. And it just started unlocking those levels of spiritual intelligence. And in many ways now it feels like, I don't know what the right word would be, but it feels like I've even surpassed what I experienced at 27, because now I actually have the context for it. I can put language to it, and it's more grounded in a sense. Whereas back then it was like, I was walking around like a floating ball of consciousness. I had really no understanding of what was happening in me. If I had a number of occasions, I would pass a mirror or a reflection and be like surprised to see a body looking back at me. And so it wasn't as integrated as it is now. And so this way I teach kind of, there's a feminine and a masculine approach to self-realization. The masculine approach is the Shiva at the third eye, which is awareness, inner silence. I call it the witness quality, being able to just witness what's happening in my life, in my mind, without reacting so much, just watching, just observing. And that brings intuitive understanding. The inner guru, right, awakens in you. You start to learn the lessons that life is offering you. That's kind of the masculine approach. The feminine approach is the energy cultivation of literally stimulating this fourth density energy in the body, which we call Kundalini, through breath work, through bhakti yoga, through trying to elevate my capacity for this energy level. And so I think doing both together is really the fastest and most efficient way of awakening or illuminating our consciousness.
Yeah. There's two things I want to ask you out of that. You mentioned a phrase, photon of consciousness, which I'm not familiar with. Can you speak about that? What's a photon of consciousness?
Yeah, great question. So we know that everything's light, right? The law of one talks about the densities. I've mentioned that a few times already. A density refers to the amount of light that's present in any given container. So it's like dimension. It's just kind of another way of seeing dimension. If I have one photon on this side that's vibrating 100 times per second, and a photon on this side that's vibrating 1,000,000 times per second, clearly this photon has a higher density of light. There's more light in that container. So the more light there is, the more information there is, right? The more information, the more ability consciousness has to express itself. So each energy center or density level is like a higher level of expression consciousness has. So when you look at like my dog, our pets, they are what the law of one calls a second density entity. So they only have the first two chakras in activation, the red ray and the orange ray, the root or the sacral. So we know that there's a clear distinction between how much consciousness your dog has to express and you have. Your dog just doesn't have the capacity to express self-awareness the way you do, because you're a third density creature. Your dog is a second density creature. But in this life, we have this unique opportunity, because we're at this transition phase, to become a fourth density being, to open the heart chakra and awaken to the reality of oneness. And as we awaken to that reality of oneness, the photon, literally the photons in our body, vibrate at a higher rate of vibration or frequency. And then that higher vibration allows for oneness or love to be experienced naturally, meaning we lose the ability to see others as separate. It feels like a lower level of consciousness to us. Like it feels like I don't know, I've used this word in the wrong context, but it feels like a dumber way of seeing reality. That people are separate. It's like, I can't relate to that belief anymore. But in third density, it just feels normal that we're all separate. And if someone, is rude to me, I'm rude to them back because they're harming me in some way. That's just normal at third density. So that's no judgment in that. But as the photon increases its vibration in me, in my body, we start to see that that's not the way things really are. And that's called the elevation of the expansion of consciousness. So this is happening in everybody to different degrees, right?
Yeah. I had an experience. It actually started, my husband and I were having a terrible argument, a real screaming argument, and divorce was being mentioned, and it was horrible. And suddenly something happened, and suddenly the whole energy of that just dropped. And all I could see was that he was me. And there was nothing, I couldn't even remember what it was about. And that also lasted for about 2 weeks. And I was in university in Glasgow at the time, and I was traveling up and down on the train, and all I could see on the train was everybody was just light. It's just, so I totally understand what you said. And also 2 weeks in, or whatever it was around that period of time, I felt it going away, because everything started to look different again. And I was like, no, I don't want it to go. So the
ego fights for its territory. That's it's something I call the Ascension Spiral, that we evolve not in a linear way, but really like a spiral. And there's levels of that spiral we go through. We come back around to the same lessons until we learn them and upgrade our perception of them. Then we go up the spiral. So it's like the third density consciousness does not go down without a fight. You may have an enlightenment experience, and in very rare instances, like Eckhart Tolle, Ramana Maharshi, it does become permanent, but that's almost always the exception. The rule is that you experience freedom, and the ego goes, wait a minute, no, I'm not done here yet. I want more time in this kingdom. I want separation consciousness, and it'll fight to get it back. And you have to know who you are and remember how much more real that vision felt, to go, no, this isn't the way things are. This is a lower level of consciousness. I want the higher level of consciousness. And through spiritual effort, you can regain the kingdom, so to speak. And I think that's what Jesus meant when he said, up until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. He meant it is gained through effort. You have to want it. It's not just going to happen to you, because all spiritual progression is a result of your free will. Do you want love? Do you want oneness? Then you have to go for it. It isn't just you're not just going to trip and fall into it, right?
Yeah. It's like grace, I think, isn't it? That we're given these glimpses, and then that motivates us to go through the purification process, I suppose, of removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, as the Course puts it.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Another question I wanted to ask you, which is a kind of sideline, but I want to ask you it because you said that you had studied Buddhism and Hinduism and A Course in Miracles, and as I also have, and there's a seeming contradiction that I'd like your opinion on. The course begins with, that the whole world was made because of the tiny mad idea that, we wanted to be separate from God. And in the Hindu tradition, the universe is Leela. It's the divine play. There's no mistake in it.
Right.
So they seem to be contradictions, that in the course's metaphysics, that the world is a mistake, that we're all really in heaven, and this is just all an illusion.
Yes.
And so they seem quite diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, this is such a juicy topic, and I love talking about this because it's so interesting when you start to unravel it. When I was in college, I met a guy I became friends with who was studying quantum physics, and he said something so fascinating to me. He said, the first semester in one of my quantum physics courses, we learned all about string theory for a whole semester. I mean, we took tests on it, passed or failed, right? And then the next semester, the teacher wrote all the string theory equations we learned on the whiteboard, and we walked into class the first day. It was like, hey, do you guys remember string theory from last semester? And we're like, okay, I got to go through a review because we're going to build upon this. And he was like, okay, so took an eraser out, erased the entire whiteboard, and just went, everything we taught you in semester 1, we now know is false. String theory is not the way things are. Everyone goes, oh, you just hear this collective sigh. What? Like, I failed 3 exams last year. He's like, but don't worry, because we had to teach you string theory, even though we know it's not really true, in order to give you the framework to understand the way we've evolved to now know that it probably does work, which is the hologram theory. So like, don't throw out string theory. Just know this is a good basis or context to help you see a higher understanding of the universe. So it's like, okay, great. It's like we couldn't teach you hologram theory until we taught you first string theory. So that's the way all spiritual truths are. They're all paradoxes because we understand truth from our level of consciousness. And this is what the course does really well, is that it meets you from third density consciousness. It speaks to you as a concession of your third density understanding of things, of separation. It doesn't expect you to be like, you can't expect someone to know trigonometry before they've learned algebra. So the course teaches you algebra first, and eventually, once you understand algebra really well, you can go to the like Advaita Vedanta teachings of Hinduism, where all is Brahman. Even the ego is Brahman. You're like, what? No, it's not. It's a mistake. It's the tiny mad idea. It's like, yes, but it's playing that role on purpose. It's all on purpose. The whole universe is a design from divine intelligence. And it's so mind-bogglingly intelligent that we have to just take it bite by bite, piece by piece, layer by layer. So the course says, under the veil of separation, or the dream world is the course's language for it, you believe you're separate. The Christ believes I'm a body, I'm a person on a journey. And so this little I, this separate I, looks out at the divine and invents the universe or the world as a separate thing. So the course is right when it says that the world, lowercase w, as a separate thing from me, is an invention, is a dream. It doesn't exist. It's a tiny mad idea. But because we're still trapped in that idea that I am separate from the world, people read A Course in Miracles and they go, okay, so the world sucks. It's stupid. It's dumb. Forget it. It's an illusion. It's all bad. It's like, no. The teaching is you are that. It's you. It's a reflection of you. It's not real as a separate thing. It's real as a mirror of your consciousness. So that's why the Course goes on to say the real world is pure happiness and peace. The real world is the one that's not separate from me. So everything I see happening out there, quote unquote, I realize is a mirror of the in here. So really there isn't an out there or an in here. It's all one. And that depiction is the Upanishads of all is Brahman. So the person doing the bad, evil thing out there isn't happening as an external event. If I'm judging it, if I'm angry about it, if I'm triggered by it, the Course says that's because it's the same energies in you. That same greed that's triggering you from the evil tyrant in Canada who's blocking the trucking convoy and all that stuff, that makes you angry because there's a tyrant in you that you haven't healed yet. When you heal the tyrant in you, the greedy, selfish power abuser in you, then you'll see the Justin Trudeau with compassion. You'll say, oh, well, he just has the same energy in him that I had to heal in myself. So I can't possibly judge him for this seemingly act of evil because I would have done the same thing had I been put in his position. Until I see it in me, it's always going to trigger me in the world. And when it stops triggering me in the world, that's my barometer that I've been healed. So the Course does this amazing thing that it meets you where you are as an ego and says, this world you see that's so full of anger and hatred and evil and all this stuff that's bothering you, it's not real. You've invented it. It's a projection of your own distortions. So heal yourself, forgive yourself, and you'll see that everything's actually shining with the light of Christ. And that's what they call the real world in the Course.
Yeah. So how about the war in Ukraine at the moment? How's that part of things? How does that link in with what you're saying? Because that doesn't look as if the world is shining with the light of Christ.
Right. So all the distortions we see in the world are manifesting in the world because they exist in us. Meaning enough of us agree with the idea of war that it's still able to manifest. You know, the Klaus Schwabs, the Justin Trudeaus, all the people we see as the wrongdoers, the evildoers in the world, they manifest as leaders in the world because people look up to them, vote for them, think they have good ideas, follow what they say, fall into their traps because those energies are in us. So when I see war happening, I say, well, that's because enough of the collective consciousness still agrees with war that it's even possible. Like, look, people are going to war, so they're agreeing with it. So yes, a large percentage of the collective consciousness disagrees with war and says this isn't the right way to do things. All war for any reason whatsoever is insanity. And that's what the Course teaches, right? But until I've healed the warring thoughts in me, I can't judge the war out there. If I have any hatred or enmity towards people, towards what's happening, if I hate the idea of war, even that's a warring thought. Yes. So it's like I have to love peace so much that I can't even conceive of war. It doesn't even compute in my mind. And once enough people vibrate at that level of consciousness, you know, these world leaders might try to go to war like Russia did with Ukraine. And all the soldiers will just be like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go to war with our neighbors. We love those people. You want us to drop bombs on a neighboring country? That's totally insane. But enough people don't see it as insane yet that it's still being carried out. So we just have to forgive that and go, that's okay. They just don't see the way of things yet. They don't see what love really is yet. So they have to do that stuff until they awaken to higher consciousness. How can they act any better? So there's no judgment in it, but it's still seen as not the highest way of truth, right?
And I think you make a really good point as well that, you know, if we have a lot of anger energy about the war,
right,
that's just feeding into the collective.
It's more war.
It's more war energy. Yeah. Thank you for that. So we've kind of talked about all sorts of topics. But what I also wanted to say is that you're going to be our teacher in the Integrated Awakening series in June. And we're kind of circling back around to the beginning because the topic that you are going to be presenting is called Empowered Devotion. And that was one of the things that, you know, that I felt, I'm sure you felt it as having been a worship pastor, that the devotional aspect was a real loss when you leave Christianity. That whole sense of, you know, I was in a charismatic church, so there was, you know, lots of, you know, singing in the spirit and just being lost in worship. That devotional part that I really missed. So you're going to take a slightly different approach to the subject of devotion in these classes. So can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, you're very right in that a lot of the Eastern traditions kind of lack the bhakti, feminine element of spirituality. And even, I studied Buddhism for many years heavily, Dzogchen and Zen Buddhism. And a lot of them will even say, like, don't worship God because you're implying that God's separate from you. It's all contemplation. It's all, knowledge and understanding. And there's truth to that to an extent, but I love the Indian tradition for that reason, because they have all the flavors. There's jnana yoga, which is pure knowledge based, like Buddhism. And then there's bhakti yoga, which is like sort of like Christianity, of deep worship and reverence and love and ecstasy for the divine. And so, the jnana yogi may look at the bhakti and say, oh, you're worshiping God like God's separate. I know that I am Brahman, I am the self, so I don't worship anything. But the bhakti says, no, I'm fully aware that I am the divine, but I love this imaginary relationship that we're separate because it allows me to dance for my lover and sing for my lover. And the bhakti is like, let me be born 1,000 more lifetimes and be ever my love and let me sing for you, right? Yeah. So it's like there's still the knowledge of non-duality, but making use of this veil of separation for worship and love. And something about that has a magnetic effect on our energy level of elevating our consciousness. So again, I think both masculine and feminine are needed equally. So the empowered devotion conversation is a bit more on the feminine side of things, but it's taking the bhakti role of worship and reverence and surrender to the divine and adding some empowerment to it, in the sense of that earlier conversation we had of really unlocking these levels of spiritual intelligence in you and seeing that as the highest act of worship. That if my beloved has put itself in this body to go on this evolutionary journey, then what higher act of worship can be done than to activate and actualize all of my divine potential? So it's like every chakra I awaken is like a new level of love and worship I give to you, right? At the heart, you are love, you are oneness. At the throat, you are wisdom. At the third eye, you are self-knowledge. At the crown, you are divine connection. You are infinite intelligence. So I want to worship you in all these ways, right? So empowered devotion is seeing, it's like getting out of your own way as a separate self. Like, oh, I want to unlock all my potential so I can be happy. Like, let's get that voice out of the equation and just say, no, it's all for you. It's all worship to you. So I want to unlock these potentials in me because it exalts and honors you. It allows you to become manifested in this realm. And that to me is just a way more exciting approach to devotion and more inspiring. And it's like I wake up every day like bursting with joy to get into my spiritual practice, because I guess it might just be me in part that I'm kind of a bhakti by nature, being a worship leader and growing up Christian. But I think there's bhakti in everybody, right? And until you really explore it, you can't know how much you do resonate with that path. So we're going to be talking about the ways to unlock this potential. And one of them is about finding the inner guru, the Sadguru within you. There is a voice of the beloved is within me, the guru, who is bringing every single life experience I have as a way to awaken this potential and unlock it. And so when I start making use of my life, that's really the fastest way to spiritual growth, because life is the sadhana ultimately. Like, you can do all the meditation and breath work and chanting you want, but to me, those are more like supplements to the real spiritual practice. They're there to help enhance the real practice, which is, how are you meeting life? How are you engaging with your life experiences? Are you being kind? Are you leading with love? Are you forgiving? Are you being patient? These are like daily challenges that inner guru is giving us. And a lot of times we miss them because we're too focused on reading the books and doing the meditations. And the most fruit is available in our actual life. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it's easy to compartmentalize, isn't it? And kind of have your spiritual life over here. And then, you close the book and then you go to work. and
Right.
and then you come back the next day and you do your practice and then you close the book. But there's no need to go and live in an ashram, is there?
Right.
Because life is providing us with everything.
Oh, yes.
Every single day.
Life is the ashram.
Life is the ashram. Yeah. Yeah. And you say in I've got the notes here for your classes. What was the bit that I wanted to say? You said empowered devotion takes a unique approach as it focuses more on realizing one's full potential as an act of worship. And by that, you mean full potential in all areas of your life, being, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's this idea we have that our desires, like the things that excite us and inspire us, those might just be what my ego wants, but I know that God really wants me to like be a nun or a monk and just go meditate all the time. And that's the spiritual ego, right? The way that spiritual ego conceptualizes this whole experience of life, that everything that's not labeled as spiritual is not spiritual and is not, what I'm meant for. And I want to help to unravel that belief, because that's another level of spiritual intelligence, again, that everything is spiritual. My relationship with my spouse is spiritual. My job is spiritual. My passions, my hobbies are spiritual. And the divine wants to use all of them for higher purposes. So when I, again, get out of my own way and say, none of these desires belong to me, the separate person, there's no separate person. These desires are manifesting on behalf of the universe. So if I'm passionate about anything, writing, art, technology, doesn't matter. The universe is passionate about that. And it wants to bring through me a new form of service to others, of higher consciousness to the world in some way, shape, or form. So it's about finding, how can this passion I have, how can I transmute it into a way that gives value to the world? Can I teach through it? Can I give a product, something, something wants to be born in you through this passion. And when you not only stop resisting it as being unspiritual, but lean into it as your life's purpose, part of your life's purpose, the divine will start to reveal to you the ways it wants to use those things for service to humanity and for your own evolution. So that's kind of another part of the conversation we're going to go into.
That's so important, isn't it? To come to this realization that everything is spiritual and we're here for joy and celebration.
Yes.
In my own life, I went from being a maths teacher to what started to come through me was poetry. Never written a poem in my life.
Yep.
And these poems just come and come and come and come. And that's just been such a surprise to me. And I know that it's not me doing it,
Yep.
It's just coming through. So that's your first workshop. They're going to be 2-hour workshops, aren't they? And there'll be an opportunity to ask you questions, and they're live, and we get to chat and ask you stuff. And then the second one is called, I love this title, it's called Give Me This Mountain. Talk about what you're going to be teaching in that one, Aaron.
Yeah. So that one is about more what we just spoke about leaning into what you're passionate about to find your destiny in life. The mountain represents like my destiny, and our destiny, our potential feels like this, unachievable thing sometimes. Like, oh man, really doing what I'm truly capable of. I don't know if I have the discipline for that or something. And I think, yes, discipline is absolutely involved in it, but I think that discipline is sort of the natural result of seeing where true value lies, right? So when you see that what I'm passionate about is what I'm meant for in this life, to devote yourself to that, to be disciplined towards that is very easy. In fact, anyone who's really disciplined will say this, that true discipline kind of happens naturally, effortlessly, when you see where the value is. When you want something bad enough, discipline is easy. And so when we follow the breadcrumb trail of our highest excitement, and it could be many things at once, the source can weave things together in ways you couldn't have possibly imagined, and create a new career path, a new destiny, a new gifting that you could have never invented yourself, right? So it's like, just keep following the breadcrumb trails of what excites you the most. And that's the clue, right? Of where the universe wants to lead you. And don't try to predict it. Don't try to assume what it's going to look like. Just keep acting on your passion and excitement. And slowly but surely, the discipline on that path will happen. And the manifestation of your gifts and abilities and destiny will just start happening right before your eyes. And it usually actually starts to happen before you even know it's happening. You know, you'll find yourself, you may start a side business or something, or you start teaching somewhere about something or doing something, and it just starts flowering really quickly, and there's a lot of favor on it. And then you're like, wait a minute, I've sort of just manifested this new career path. I just hadn't seen it until now. Like, you start catching hold of it like that. That's what Give Me This Mountain means. It's like, don't look at this like it's some challenging, difficult, insurmountable task to manifest my highest potential. Look at it as, I was born for this, I was meant for this, and so the universe will make the way for me. If I just, what did Jesus say? Be faithful with the little things first, and then the greater things will be given to you.
Yeah, yeah. And it's such a wonderful way to live. It plays back to that spiritual intelligence, doesn't it? That just allowing that to move you and live you and take you where it wants to go is
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for this. I think it's going to be absolutely amazing. So for our listeners, details of Aaron's workshops will be in the show notes for this podcast, as well as information on Aaron's website, his YouTube channel, and where you can connect further with him. So any last words you'd like to say before we wrap up our interview today?
Just thank you for having me on today, and for the opportunity to teach this at the summit in June. I'm so excited and looking forward to it. And really, especially the Q&A periods are always my favorite, because, you know, when people get excited about what I'm excited about, it feels like a synergy happens. So yeah, I just can't wait to see you there, and hope you will join me there in June.
Thank you. Thanks so much for talking to me, Aaron. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Susan. Likewise.